Hey, I'm Daniel and welcome back to another Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era video, and today we're gonna have a first impressions video of some of the new stuff from the upcoming Summerset expansion, specifically these two skill lines and two new classes. Of course, quick disclaimer that all of those components are still prototypes, so things are subject to change, and these of course by no means a full representation of the full expansion. Obviously there is no gazetteer, no quests, no enemies. This is just a tiny slice of what we can expect from the title later next year. And we already know that there is more stuff will be added to this expansion through a stretch goal, so if you're curious to check it out for yourself, I'll put a link to the campaign page in the description that you can check it out for yourself. And well, let's go. Alright, so this is some of the new stuff that we'll see in this expansion. Two new skill lines, Assassination and Aedric Spear, and two new classes, Assassin and Mage. And I guess let's start by looking at this Assassination skill line, so I'm gonna move the rest aside for now. Now, Assassination is a stamina based skill line and it does not require any particular battle form, which is great, and it certainly will open some extra different strategic possibilities. But now let's have a look first at the level 1 skill die called Mark Target. On the one side, after this engage, apply this die to your target. When you deal damage to this enemy, ignore up to 2 of its defense. When this enemy is defeated, exhaust this die, and this die can be applied to a quest unit. And on the other face of this die, it's a drain die. Apply a Bane status die to an adjacent enemy and then gain a status die yourself. So I think both of them are pretty cool. What's interesting about the first result is that it's a status die. I think we don't have many of them. Illusion probably one being of the prime example that we had so far, but this is something new. You apply this die on top of the enemy and you ignore an up to 2 on its defense. And I think what's cool about it is that it doesn't have to be adjacent enemy. It says that you can apply this to your target, and of course target is a pretty kind of flexible thing. It depends on your battle form, on your range, so potentially you can use this even as a mage, as a spellcaster if you want to. Now obviously this skill die doesn't deal any damage on its own apart from the Bane side, which probably gives you an indication that it's kind of designed to be as a sort of secondary skill line or to work with some other skill lines, but not maybe necessarily as your basic starting skill line, although of course you can still combine it with combat dice. I would say it's also pretty interesting to note that there is 2 sides of misses, so basically we have only 33% chance of landing either 2 of those results or misses, which is not typical for level 1 dice, which again I think further amplifies that it's more designed like a secondary supporting skill line rather than the main one. Moving on to the level 2, we have Grim Focus. On one side, after rolling dice, you may exhaust this die to change a stamina based skill die roll to the side of your choice, or on the other drain side, change the results of up to 2 other stamina based skill dice rolled disengage to the side of your choice. Wow. This is strong. Now for the first result, because it's an active die and it says after rolling dice, I'm not 100% sure if you actually can resolve this right away and sort of place this in your active slot and then also change the die rolled the single engage, because it says after rolling dice, so I have a feeling that you need to roll this die basically as a separate thing, as a separate engage, place this in your active slot, and only then after rolling dice you can then exhaust it to change other dice you rolled for your next engages, let's say. But in a nutshell, that is essentially like a Power Stone but for physical type of engages. Because if you remember Power Stone from the Aedric Summoning skill line, it has a very similar effect. It allows you to change the skill dice you rolled to a side of your choice, but because it's a magic type skill die, you could roll it only alongside other Magicka type dice or some other skill dice that don't require any battle form, for example like acrobatics or speech or other dice of that sort. But with this one, with Grim Focus, you basically have kind of sort of similar same-ish effect, but that you can actually use for all stamina based, which is like typically all physical skill dice, which is great. And not only that, but I think because this is an active die and it can sit in your active slot and you can use this whenever you need to, and you can even decide whether you want to exhaust this die only after rolling dice, which means after seeing the result. I think this gives even more flexibility compared to Power Stone, and I think this might be one of the most used level 2 skill die in the game, in future builds. I mean, it's that strong. I mean, just imagine combining this with something, for example, like Executioner from the two-handed skill line, which normally has only 50% chance of landing a hit, so It's kind of tricky to do this naturally, but with this Grim Focus it's a guarantee result, which is quite literally a game changer. I'm really happy to see the way it's designed as an active die and that it works on the stamina base. I think this is brilliant. I absolutely love Grim Focus. Moving on to the next level 2 skill die, we have Killer Blade. It's another active die, and it says on your turn exhaust this die to defeat an adjacent enemy with exactly X health, which can be up to 3 health. And yeah, speaking of the executioner skill, I think this is somewhat similar. It's an insta defeat effect, but instead of the one that scales with health, this is require enemy to have a specific breakpoint, specific exact amount of health. And I think we can already see the synergy between this Killer's Blade and Grim Focus, because Killer's Blade has only 50% chance of landing the hit. By the way, it's the same as Executioner, so it's kinda tricky sometimes to roll it on the side that you want, but with Grim Focus, again, you can choose the side because this is a stamina-based skill line, so you can totally just guarantee set this aside, set it to the side with a value of 3. Now, the question is this value of 3, which is the best result as you can have on Killer's Blade, is strong enough? And I think honestly, yes. Given the fact that this die can just sits on in your active slot, and you can use this whenever you want. You can first deal some damage to the enemy to reduce its health, and then kind of finish it off with this Killer's Blade. I think this is pretty cool. You can almost think about it as this die can deal up to 3 true damage, provided that this damage is finishing off enemy, but of course it's actually even better than that, because you remember that all those kind of instant defeat effects, they bypass all enemy skills like Divert or Stalwart or even Shatter, so this is really good. And yeah, I think it's great. This Killer's Blade, I like it. It might be not as strong or impactful as Grim Focus, but I think it fits with the Assassination skill line thematically, and I really like the way it's implemented, that it sits as your active slot and you sort of wait for the opportunity to make this final killing blow. I think this is really cool. Now, moving on to the level 3, and the first die we have is Teleport Strike. It says place yourself in an unoccupied hex adjacent to any enemy in sight. Then you may remove a stealth status die from your cooldown track or exhaust an available assassination skill die to deal up to 2 true damage to that enemy. Now, first of all, I must say that placing yourself in an unoccupied adjacent hex to any enemy in sight, this is huge. This is potentially can be like a teleport up to 10 hexes, and of course this doesn't even count as your movement, so just that part of the skill alone, I think it really deserves a credit. But then remove a stealth or exhaust an available assassination skill die to deal up to true damage. I mean, it's alright, it could be stronger, but at the same time, true damage is a good damage, and I think it can work with your Killer's Blade, so we can teleport to deal 2 true damage, I mean, weaken the enemy and then finish it off with the Killer's Blade. Maybe that's kind of the idea. Again, I think it fits with Assassination. It's kind of like a dash and backstab, combined into one skill. I think this is pretty decent, but personally, I think if I'm gonna use this Assassination with this particular die, I'm probably gonna use it mostly just as essentially as a movement, as a teleportation, because moving to adjacent hex to any enemy inside, this is really good. Moving on to the next skill die of level 3, we have Reaper's Mark. It's another active die, and what's interesting is that there is no side of misses, basically. There is no tenacity side, and it says that after an enemy is defeated, increase this die value by 1. At the start of your turn, you may drain this die to defeat a targetable enemy with a level equal to or lower to X. If the enemy has a status die applied to it, treat this die as double its face value. And wow, I think that last sentence really changed it all, because if you see the maximum value you have here is 5, so defeating a level 5 enemy kinda alright, not too bad, but not anything special. But if the enemy has a status die applied to it, you double that value. That means that you can insta defeat up to level 10 enemy. And oh wow, I really like the synergy that it kind of forces you to play a little bit more strategic in advance. You need to think, oh, what status die can I apply in order to double that damage. And it's really cool. I think it's cool that it's growing, because usually I think this might be the first time we see that a die sitting in an active slot is actually increases value over time rather than decreasing. So this is pretty cool, and that again is another defeat effect which is very strong, and it fits the assassination skill line. I think really good. And that again, last sentence changes it all for me. And finally, moving on to the level 4, we have a single die called Hemorrhage. It's deal 1 true damage to your target, and you may drain any number of available assassination skill dice and increase this true damage by 2 for each die you choose to drain this way. Now, let's just think, like hypothetically, let's say if you roll this die and you have all other 5 assassination skill dice available, that means you would deal 11 true damage, but after that you wouldn't end up with a single die in your cooldown track with the 5 of the rest being drained. So this is kind of like a final blow of the battle, basically. Otherwise, obviously, you wouldn't be able to use your assassination skill dice at all, unless of course you have a way of recovering that many drained dice. And honestly, I think 11 damage for the cost of draining 5 skill dice, I think that is maybe not as strong as I was hoped. Maybe they should increase this true damage by 3 instead of by 2, so that you don't need to drain that many dice. Otherwise, it's essentially, it kind of forces you sort of to either not drain these dice at all and not use this ability, or play a class that can recover drained dice, namely Bard or Spell Sword, for example. And on the other face, deal 1 true damage and apply a Bane status die. Well, I guess Bane is pretty cool with the Reaper's Mark. That is another way of applying Bane, in addition to what we've seen on level 1, so there is kind of 2 already ways of doing that within the skill line itself. But still, other than that, I think that level 4 skill die is just a little bit underwhelming, just my personal opinion. Though of course, we should probably see still how some other synergies might affect this. So all in all, I think this is a really decent skill line, specifically for this level 2 skill die. Green Focus is definitely going to be my favorite. I'm very confident in that, and I really hope it's going to stay this way all the way to the final release copy of the game. Alright, now let's move on to the next skill line, and we have Aedric Spear. I'm pretty sure you guys know how to pronounce this, so let me know in the comments. So Aedric Spear is another skill line that associated with stamina, and it requires you to use a two-handed to heavy weapon battle form, which is finally a new alternative that we have to two-handed that we had in the base game. And for this one we have a sort of special rule, which says that after rolling dice during engage, if you gather at least Aedric Spear and gather only Aedric Spear and combat skill dice, you may change your target to a non-adjacent enemy as if you were in Magicka. So basically, if you use it only Aedric Spears and you combine them with combat, you can kind of think about them as using maybe thematically as a throwing magic spears or something like that. But of course, mechanically, the most important part is that you use range up to your Magicka stat, which is pretty cool. This is definitely a unique twist, and it breaks pretty much all the rules that we know, because it still requires you to be in a heavy weapon battle form, but you can use range and target enemies up to your Magicka. This is definitely something on the more kind of advanced and unique side, and I love it. So on the level 1 we have a dice called Beating Jabs or Biting Jabs, and it's interesting because it says that for each Biting Jabs you gather, you may add 1 free available combat skill die to your engage up to your Magicka stat, which again something completely different, and it breaks all the rules that we know so far. So normally you can gather only number of dice up limited to your stat, which in this case is a stamina based skill line. So let's say if your stamina is 2, you can normally roll only 2 of those dice, but then you can add 2 more, in this case combat skill dice up to your Magicka stat. So if you have 2 Magicka, you can add that as well. So this is really interesting. I think in that sense it's a pretty strong starting skill line potentially. Now moving on to the level 2, we have Radiant Ward, which says that this die can be rolled in defense in addition to heavy weapon, and on the one face it says when engaged by an enemy, drain a combat skill die from anywhere on your mat to prevent 1 damage, and after that engage you deal 1 true damage to the engaging enemy. And on the other face it says when engaged by enemy, drain 1 available combat skill die anywhere on your mat to prevent 1 damage. So same thing, but also apply a blind status die to that enemy. Now initially when I first read this for the first time, I thought, you know, there is probably not much use in applying blind when you're engaged by adjacent enemy, because chances are you likely will be the strongest enemy, so they're still gonna be targeting you anyway. But then I read there is no mention of adjacent, which means even if you get hit by a, let's say, a ranged enemy, they can still get blind from this result. This is definitely, again, something that we have not seen before, and this is pretty cool. I think this Radiant Ward is amazing. There is so many potential synergies with other builds, more like a defensive builds, and I can totally see him being used even among other skill lines just for this level 2 alone. Really like the way it's designed as a little reflect and blinding damage. Yeah, this is so cool. Moving on to the second skill die of level 2, we have Piercing Javelin. Deal damage to your target equal to the number of hexes away your target is from you. Then move your target up to the number of hexes further away from you. So this is just somewhat a little bit confusing, but basically if the enemy, let's say 5 hexes away, then this will deal 5 damage, and then if you want to, you can move the target further those 5 hexes, even further away from you. And on the other face, it says deal 2 damage to your target equal to the number of hexes away from target is away from you, so I guess something, but then apply a day status die to your target. And personally, I think this is quite decent. I like that the damage is scalable, so it potentially can be, you know, from 2 to 6 damage, so we have a range in that, so this is pretty decent in that. I was first a little bit worried that you might push the enemies too further away, that you might even don't need to push them far away, but then it says that you can move up to that number, so of course up to that includes 0. If you don't want to push enemies away, you don't have to, so in that sense I think this is good. Nothing too much crazy, but just a good, probably reliable damage in that sense. Right, let's move on to the level 3, and the first one we have is Focused Charge. Move up to 3 hexes, then deal X damage to each adjacent enemy. You may drain this die along with a combat skill die from anywhere on your mat to treat this damage as true damage. And wow, I think this is super strong. Not only it's free movement, so you don't have to spend your move action, but also you deal damage to each adjacent enemy, so this is essentially almost like a cleave, although it doesn't scale as much. But of course you can drain a combat die from anywhere on your mat, which again, this is great. So it's not only available skill die, you can drain even from your cooldown track or from your active slot, so this is great, and it can deal potentially up to 4 true damage to each adjacent enemy. Wow, this is really strong. And I'm so happy to see that we finally have an alternative to cleave, because let's be honest, cleave can be sometimes just absolutely ridiculous, dealing that much damage to each enemy. So wow, finally we have a good competitor. And I'm even a little bit surprised that it's on level 3, not level 4, even though the damage is not as high as on Cleave potentially, but again, you can treat this as true damage if you want to. So this can arguably be even higher damage than that, again, depending on the enemies you encounter, but this is really strong, and I'm happy to see a skill die like that. Moving on to the next skill die of level 3, we have Spear Shards. It's a status die which says place this die in the hex occupied by your target and deal 3 damage to your target and 1 damage to each enemy adjacent to it. When an adventurer ends their turn in or adjacent to a hex containing this die, that adventurer may drain an available combat skill die to recover the X leftmost dice in the cooldown track. And this is something really interesting. Not only this is another extra little area damage, which it looks like a little bit kind of the theme of this spear damage, of this skill line. So 3 damage to your target, 1 damage to each adjacent enemy, but then when you sort of pick up this spear when you're adjacent to it, you can drain an available combat skill die to recover up to 4 leftmost dice from their cooldown track. And I think this is really cool. I definitely did not expect some recovery mechanics built into those skill lines, because usually all those kind of heavy weapon things, they do the opposite things. They clutter your cooldown with fatigue, because I can imagine it's kind of exhausting just swinging the sword or the spear in this case. But here in this case, no, we're actually the opposite. We're recovering dice, so you can potentially use a focus charged or some other skill dice even quicker, cycling them quicker. So yeah, I'm not fully understand the power level of this skill type in particular, but I do quite like the recovery dice mechanics. And finally, move on to the level 4, we have Radial Sweep. Recover all drained Aedric Spear and combat skill dice and deal damage equal to the number of dice recovered to each enemy adjacent to you. So remember all of those drained combat skill die anywhere from your mat. Yeah, we have a couple of dice that do that, and now you sort of sweeping them back, you recover all of those dice and deal damage equal to the number of dice recovered, and again to each adjacent enemy. So yeah, this area damage, if you will, is definitely a theme of this skill line. We have Focus Charged and Spear Shards that, even though just a tiny bit of damage, it's still damage to adjacent enemies. And now this Radial Sweep, I think this is fantastic. I'm really glad this is designed the way it's designed so far. And yeah, I think we have a fantastic competitor to the two-handed skill line we have in the base game. Well done. I really like the way it's designed. Now let's have a look at the 2 new classes, starting with Assassin and its innate ability. At the start of each session, add quest enemy unmarked target or marked target to either enemy bag. When this unit is drawn from the bag to deploy it to the unmarked target side without subtracting from the AP. If the enemy was not defeated by you specifically, return it to its bag during battle cleanup. So let me quickly show you this enemy chip that we're talking about. It's this one, and maybe let me try to zoom in a little bit if my camera will pick it up. Yep, so this is the unmarked target, which as you can tell is probably strong. It's quite strong enemy just by looking at the stats and its skills. And on the flip side, it marked target, which is not as strong. But whenever you draw this enemy, you must draw it and deploy it on this unmarked side. So this is going to be a quite challenging target that it seems. And the only reason why we deploy this enemy is that because this is our upgrade requirement. In order to become Master Assassin, we must defeat this target enemy, which I think is pretty cool thematically, even though it's a little bit shame that this innate ability basically does nothing except that makes our encounters harder. But yeah, this is pretty thematic, I think. Now moving on to the class abilities. The first one is Surprise Attack, deal 1 true damage to an adjacent level 1 enemy. Well, what can I say? For 1 tenacity, 1 true damage is generally kind of like on par with other class abilities. That's kind of expected damage from 1 tenacity, but the limitation that it can only deal to level 1 enemy, I think that is a little bit underwhelming. I don't know why it needs to be that way. It could be at least level 1 or 5 enemy, but just level 1, I think this is too restrictive, and we'll see if this is gonna change in the final production version. But yeah, it's just a little bit odd. I don't think this limitation does make much sense, at least not to me. So let's move on to the next one. Is Ambush, move 1 hex, perform a free engage. You may ignore 1 defense on your target for this engage. Now what a free engage is basically you just don't need to add light fatigue, which is actually quite a valuable thing, especially if you're playing on the expert difficulty, and especially if you're playing with some extra difficulty modifiers. But of course, other than that, it doesn't do anything crazy than that, just ignoring 1 defense. I mean, it's alright, but apparently our novice assassin is just training how to insta-kill other enemies, and definitely not quite as good at this just yet. So moving on to the next class ability, we have Relentless Focus. It's a gain a stealth status die, and this is actually quite decent, even though personally I have quite mixed feeling on the stealth mechanic in this game in general. But whenever you can do this on demand, I think this is pretty cool. This is kind of similar to the Wood Elf's racial ability from the base game, that you can gain status dice, stealth status die on demand without rolling, without doing any jumps or hoops. Just guarantee, spend tenacity, gain stealth, boom. This is pretty nice. Someone, for example, like Nightblade definitely would want a skill like that. And finally, for 5 tenacity, we have Scales of Pitiless Justice. Remove quest unit marked target from the enemy bag and set it aside. At the start of the next clash, add it to the EP and deploy it first. So basically, this whole ability is kinda a forcing way of promoting you to the master side much quicker. And note that it says marked target, so basically if you spend 5 tenacity to mark this target, it's gonna turn from this one, which is a quite brutal fellow, just looking at the stats and 3 defense and all of those skills, of course. But if you mark it, you spend 5 tenacity, it's gonna turn into this one, which is definitely not as dangerous as that one. And if you do that, if you defeat this enemy, you then will become Master Assassin. So let's see what's gonna change on the Master side, starting with the innate ability. After you gain a stealth status die, place 1 health chip here with a maximum of 6. This is your focus stat. And you look at that, now all of a sudden we have a completely different innate ability with a new resource, similar to the Necromancer stack, that we're gonna place it here. And let's see how this ability will change and what this focus stack is. So Ambush, for 1 tenacity, move 1 hex and gain 1 focus. Perform a free engage, you may ignore 1 defense on your target. Okay, so it was pretty much the same thing, but now we also gain 1 focus. Alright, and let's see where we can spend this focus on. And Surprise Attack. Remove 1 chip from your focus stack to defeat a level 1 enemy in sight, or 5 chips to defeat a level 5 enemy in sight. Wow, this might be the most drastic change in the ability. I mean, let me flip it again. This Surprise Attack just deal 1 true damage to an adjacent level 1 enemy. This is basically like with using this on the trading dummy, you know, just 1 true damage, 1 adjacent level 1 enemy. What's that? And look how it's changing to remove 1 chip from your focus stat to defeat a level 1 enemy in sight, or 5 chips to defeat a level 5 enemy in sight. Now we're talking, this is much closer to the assassin that we probably all want. And yeah, for just 2 tenacity, I think this is amazing. I can already see a sort of like a mini game of gaining this resource, this new focus stack, and then spending them on this surprise attack. I think this is really cool. Alright, moving on to the next class ability, Relentless Focus, gain 1 focus and gain 1 stealth status die. How interesting. But our innate ability says that whenever we gain a stealth status die, we also place 1 health chip here. So does it mean that for 2 tenacity with Relentless Focus, we essentially gain 2 of those new focus stacks? It seems so, and if that's the case, I think this is pretty cool. It makes using our surprise attack ability more often, more freely, which is nice. Now the only thing is still not very clear is whether those things, this focus stack is persist between battles, and I believe it should, kinda similar to the Necromancer Necrosis stack, We'll see, probably gonna need some clarification on that. Although at the same time, I can imagine this might be a little bit too OP, because you can start your battle already fully loaded with this focus attack and then just spamming your surprise attack every turn. That could be a little bit OP, but I don't know, we're Assassin after all, so we'll see, but definitely some clarification needed. And next, we have Daedric Mines, a completely new ability, and this time in ranged battle form. Remove any number of chips from your focus stack to roll that many status dice. Place each result into a different unoccupied hex in range. When a unit moves into one of these hexes, they gain this status die. First of all, I quite like that we can choose the number of this focus stack that we spend. That's kind of the general theme that I love, flexibility. Then we can, if we want to, we can use only one, or if we want, we can spend all 6 of them. And then it says that when a unit moves into one, so it's not only enemies, but actually if you roll all 6 stealth status die, if that ridiculously can happen sometimes, you can potentially just gain all of them if you want to. I almost think about it as basically a better version of, I believe it was archer skills, that you roll just a random free, I believe, status dice and then apply them, and you have to apply them to enemies even if that a stealth status die, but this is kind of a little bit more flexible, at least kind of the way I think about this initially, and yeah, this looks pretty decent, can't complain. And now for 4 tenacity, Master Assassin, Enduring. When dealing damage to an enemy, you may remove any number of chips from your focus stack to ignore that much defense on that enemy. And wow, this is Enduring ability, so it's always active as long as you have that much tenacity, and you can effectively turn pretty much any damage you want from any skill lines into true damage in that sense, ignoring defense on any enemy. Wow. Okay, I think overall this Master Assassin definitely delivers on the theme. When I was reading the novice side, I was frankly a little bit kind of underwhelmed, thinking that, hey, how possible this is Assassin? Because all it does is just deals 1 damage only to a level 1 enemy, but you look at that, this might be the most impactful upgrade we've seen so far. It just changes the class dramatically as soon as you defeat your marked target, which again also makes it quite thematic, so yeah. Overall, thumbs up for this skill line, for this class, and obviously you can pair it with the Assassination skill line to go further into the theme of Assassination, so yeah, all in all, I'm pretty satisfied with that, even though a couple of clarifications are probably needed. And finally, let's move on to the final component that we're gonna be previewing today. This is another class, and that is Mage. Plain and simple, just Mage with its innate ability that says when engaging in Magicka, you may roll 1 more die than your Magicka stat. And well, I'd say this is pretty decent. This is pretty begin friendly. It means you can potentially learn and acquire new skills a little bit more aggressively, because you effectively have 1 extra Magicka stat when you're engaging in Magic battle form, so you don't necessarily need to upgrade your Magicka stat right away, even though of course you still might want to do this just for the sake of range. But now let's move on to the class abilities, starting with the first one, Undo. For 1 tenacity interrupt, after you roll dice, reroll 1 die. I think this is brilliant. It's so simple, it's so useful. Again, rerolling dice, pretty much everything that gives you control over your rolls in some way or another, whether it's a rerolling or changing the die to a specific phase that you want. All of those effects are very strong, at least in my view, and this is nice. I like the name Undo, and I like the effect, and for 1 tenacity, yes please, I think this is great. It perfectly fits with this kind of mage archetype that is sort of, you can think about it as maybe moving time backwards or something like that. I think, yeah, this is nice. I like it. Now moving on to the next one, it's Mage Light Enduring. Ignore sight restriction. Okay, so this is an Enduring ability, which means it's always active as long as you have that much tenacity. And ignore sight restriction, Well, I'm now instantly thinking of that OP item that we have in the base game. How does it called? Signet of the Worm or something? Basically when you can deal damage to all targetable enemies instead of just 1. But now even that ignoring sight restriction, that could be pretty much a one-shot of the entire clash, or even a big delve or a dungeon or whatever. Interesting, Perhaps actually apart from delves, I can't really remember any sight restrictions that would actually limit me in engaging enemies, but I think this might come in handy. I mean, it's enduring, so you don't even need to spend that much tenacity, so this is alright. Now, moving on to the next one, Accelerate, take a free movement action, and yeah, I think this is decent. Sometimes, and I would say for all spellcasters in general, movement is somewhat limited, because generally you don't need a lot of stamina, so unless you of course train in light armor, then you probably don't even need a lot of stamina, so sometimes this can be a little bit tricky, particularly in delves or certain endgames where movement is really necessary. But for 2 tenacity, take a free movement action, yes please. Nothing too fancy, but very useful nevertheless. Pretty cool stuff. Moving on to the next one, time stop, interrupt. Before a non-quest enemy's turn, skip its turn. Oh wow! This might be actually the best crowd controlling effect we've seen in the game so far. And to be fair, we haven't seen many of them, but we do sort of those kind of things in the illusion skill line and now as a class ability. So essentially, you can almost treat this as if you're ignoring all damage. That's kind of another way of framing it about it. Just imagine if some ranger, some pesky ranger would engage you and you would deal damage, but instead you would say, hey, no damage. But this is kind of in a similar vein, but maybe even actually stronger, because an enemy could engage potentially multiple adventurers, multiple party members, and of course the enemy is not even moving, so it completely skips its turn, which is very, very powerful. Wow, I think this ability is absolutely awesome. And finally we have Meteor for 5 tenacity, deal true damage equal to your Magicka stat to a targetable enemy. And so given that we can train Magicka stat, or any other stat for that matter, up to 6, that means that for 5 tenacity we can deal potentially up to 6 true damage, which again, because it's true damage, is definitely makes it more, a little bit stronger than you might initially think, especially if you're dealing with some high defense enemies. But there are also probably a couple of ways to slightly increase your Magicka stat. I believe there are a couple of items that can do that. So, you know, maybe not the best damage dealing skill in the game. If you compare it with someone like Pilgrim or even Arcanist, I think this Meteor is still pretty decent, but of course, personally for me, time stop and undo here are the king of this side so far. But of course, let's change to the Master Mage and see what's going to change here. Starting going with the innate ability. When engaging in magic battle form, you may roll 1 more die than your Magicka stat. Okay, so no changes in that. But you may treat your Magicka stat as if it is your stamina stat. And oh boys, this is huge. This is exactly the light armor I was referring to, so that a skill die that you can treat your Magicka as your stamina. So basically, long story short, if you have 6 Magicka and no stamina whatsoever, you can still move up to 6 hexes because you can treat Magicka as stamina. Wow, this innate ability is absolutely massive, and it's changing the way you can build character, because you probably don't need stamina that much now, which is really cool. Yep, this is huge. I really like this innate ability. And undo now interrupt. After roll dice, roll 1 die, and these can be triggered multiple times in a turn. Wow, so now you can spam this undo command Z button basically as many times as you want, as many times of course as you have tenacity. But the funny thing is, even if the dice landed on the tenacity side, you gain tenacity and then you can spend the same tenacity on undo again to reroll it again. Wow, this is really cool. This is incredibly strong and I like it thematically as well. Yeah, really nice. Now Mage Light, no changes. Accelerate, no changes. Time stop, now before an enemy's turn, skip its turn. Oh, okay, so it's no longer restricts to being just only non-quest units. It's now any enemy, and just imagine crowd controlling the Slanderer. Huh? How about that? Yes, please. This is now definitely the strongest crowd controlling ability we have in the game, for sure. Big thumbs up for that. And Meteor, no changes, but I think it doesn't need to. I mean, given how strong this innate ability and undo and time stop, yeah, I think this is already bonkers. But of course, that's just my opinion. I'm curious what you guys think. What's your favorite class ability or other things that you've seen in this video so far? Please let me know in the comments. And that's a wrap for today's video, but before we sign off, just want to let you know that I have now a dedicated playlist specifically for all new stuff on this campaign. There is already a video with my honest thoughts on the campaign itself, plus of course all the individual first impression videos for different expansions with new classes and new skill lines. Definitely check those out, and of course I have beyond that more than 20 of other videos of the Elder Scrolls on my channel with a deep dive, class guides and skill line breakdowns. Definitely check that out if this is something you would like. And of course don't forget to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of the new uploads for the Elder Scrolls and other games on my channel. And well, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.